Alright, hello and welcome to episode 2, I don't know why I had to think about that, episode 2 of season 5 of My Hero Academia. So, we watched episode 1 last week, and it was a very fun episode, but it was also very clearly kind of like a recap, filler kind of episode, right? It was getting us back up to speed, showed us where all the characters were, kind of what point they'd reached in their development, reminded us who everyone was, kind of where the story's gotten to this point. You know, it was a good, fun episode, but it was also very clearly like a fillery episode to bring you back up to speed, which means I assume now we're getting into the actual content of the season, which is very exciting. We actually had we had two separate Dabi related cliffhangers last episode. The first being Dabi showing up to Endeavor and Hawks right after the Nomu fight, and then the second one we saw Hawks showing up to Dabi. So yeah, I don't know which one we're going to be following off from. We could be following off with the Endeavor one or the Hawks one. Who knows? I don't know. I might have messed up a word earlier in that sentence, but I can't bother to go back and think about it. Oh well, you get the point I'm trying to say. I have no idea what's going to happen. I mean, there's tons of things there's tons of like general predictions I have regarding what might happen this season overall, of course. But in terms of what's going to happen this episode, no idea. But yeah, I don't really have much to say. I mean, I'll quickly recap what I said at the end of the last episode, which is that I don't know why Hawks is meeting up with Dabi, but I don't think he's a villain yet. You know what I mean? Like, maybe he is. I could totally see it be a thing where he's a villain and he's masquerading as a hero. I mean, it's possible, right? But as of right now, I'm not convinced that he's a villain. I think it's more likely that he's still a hero, but I don't know why he'd be meeting up with Dabi. So I'm not ruling out the possibility he has some villainous intentions, but I'm just not convinced as of right now. But we'll see, right? We'll see what happens. But yeah, before I get into the video, before I get into the reaction, obligatory, you know, if you like the content, make sure to subscribe, because I realize that I haven't been releasing too much recently, but I'm trying to get back into it again. Update video will be coming at some point where I'll kind of explain my plans for the future and what's going on. But yeah, make sure to subscribe if you like the video, because that means you get more stuff, which is always good. Leave a like, leave a comment, all that good stuff. But yeah, I don't really have anything else to say, so let's actually get into the video. Alright, so that was episode 2 of season 5 of My Hero Academia, and we definitely, I definitely have a lot more to talk about after that episode than I did the last one. Yeah, a lot of stuff happened, so I suppose we can really split this episode into 4 chunks to discuss, because there wasn't really much. Well, there was stuff with Deku, but I mean, like, there wasn't really stuff with UA and the students or anything like that. There was stuff with Endeavor, there was stuff with Dabi and Hawks, and then there was stuff with Deku and I always fucking one for all. So that's actually, I don't know why I went up to 5. There's only 3 things actually. So yeah, Hawks and Dabi, Endeavor, and Deku. The relation between Dabi and Endeavor is interesting, because I am very certain, I'm like 95% certain that Dabi is a Todoroki, right? Like, it's not confirmed, at least as far as I'm aware, but it seems pretty certain at this point, right? And yet Endeavor doesn't treat him like that. This is something that immediately caught my attention, is that when they met, Endeavor referred to him as League of Villains Dabi, which is a very formal way of, you know, like, you state the group he belongs to and then his villain name, right? That's a very formal way of, you know, addressing someone, a villain. Like, you are blah 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 from the league. Well, you are from the League of Villains, Dabi. You know, like, if he and Dabi had this close father-son thing that went awry, you'd think he would respond in a more personal way, right? Like, referring to him by his, you know, actual name, maybe not even bothering with the whole League of Villains thing, just being like, oh, blah blah blah. You know what I mean? So, the way I see it, there are 2 options. One is more likely, one is less likely. The less likely option is that Endeavor is fully aware of who Dabi is, but they have grown so distant from each other that they no longer recognize each other. Not in the literal sense of not recognizing each other, but more in kind of the figurative sense of, I know who you are, but you're a completely different person now, right? Kind of like I went into the last episode where it's possible when Dabby said this is the first time we've met, it could have been along the lines of, I've met you before, but this new identity of mine, this is the first time I have met you, right? The person I was before doesn't exist anymore, kind of thing. It could be a similar thing from Endeavor's point of view, where it's like, yes, I know who you are, but you're someone completely different to me now, right? I think that's less likely. It's possible, but I think it's less likely. It seems more likely that Dabby is such a different person now that Endeavor just legitimately doesn't recognize him, right? In fact, let me go back and actually check. What's Dabby's eye color? Does he have the same eye color as Endeavor? Let me see. Yeah, it looks like he does have those kind of light blue, kind of turquoisey eyes that Endeavor does. So, it's very possible. Yeah, look, if there's this shot here. I'm telling you to look, obviously you can't look, but I'm looking at this shot here of the two of them looking at each other. They very clearly have the exact same eye color. So yeah, the fact that they're related is pretty certain. Like, it's about as certain as it can be without being confirmed. They even have the exact same eye color, right? Which makes it interesting why they're acting so formal to each other, right? Endeavor acting very formal towards him, it can make sense, right? Maybe Dabby ran away at a young age, and it's been so long, and Dabby is so different in personality and appearance that he legitimately just doesn't recognize him. Dabby, I suppose maybe he's acting this way to put up that front. Maybe he doesn't want Endeavor to realize yet. You know? I mean, there's no I suppose it is possible that he is just like, oh, this is the first time we've met because he's putting up this act of, you don't know who I am and I'm not going to reveal that to you. Yes, you know, that is possible. There was a line later in the episode where Todoroki's brother, I forget his actual name, but Todoroki's brother said, I won't forget what you did to Mom and Shoto, and what you did to Big Brother something. I might have written it down in my notes. Big Brother Toya, I think it was, maybe? Toya? I can't remember what it was, but he said, what you did to Big Brother Toya. As far as I'm aware, we've never seen Big Brother Toya. We've seen Shoto, we've seen the white-haired guy whose name I forget, we've seen the sister, we've seen the mum, we've seen the dad, obviously, but we've never seen this Big Brother, which is interesting that we've never even seen him. I mean, we might have seen him in flashbacks, you know, in the flashbacks we saw of Todoroki's childhood, we might have seen him there, you know. Maybe we'll look back and be like, oh my god, it's Dabby, you know, it's entirely possible, but as far as I'm aware, in the present, we haven't seen him. I mean, we probably have seen him, but you know what I mean. We probably have seen him, but we haven't seen him, and in a way where the show has wanted us to know that we've seen him, if you get what I mean. But I wouldn't be surprised if this Big Brother is him. And this kind of goes into what I was talking about last episode, right? If Dabby is the Big Brother, and the white-haired brother was like, and what you did to Big Brother, blah blah blah, right? If Dabby was the oldest child, then I could definitely see it being a thing where what Endeavor did to Shoto was very cruel, but maybe it was toned down. You know what I mean? Like, maybe even that wasn't him at his worst. Maybe he went really overboard with the first child, the eldest brother, and messed him up so badly that, like, he ran away or something, right? He ran away and holds this massive, massive childhood grudge. And it's what I went into last episode where I said Endeavor's arc at the moment is all about facing what he's done, right? He can't apologize for it. He can't just go back to his family and expect them to be forgiving. You know, when you do something that terrible to people, you can't just go back like, hey, look, I'm back. Let's just forget about it and live. You know, that's not how it works, right? You need to... Sometimes you can't even expect to be forgiven at all, right? And that's kind of what Endeavor's doing. He's not expecting to be forgiven. He just wants to atone for what he's done and try his best to make the lives of his children the best he can and send them down the right path. If they don't forgive him, then they don't forgive him. But regardless of that, the least he can do is try to make sure that he does right by them now and sends them down the right path now, right? So if this whole arc is about him atoning for his past and atoning for his sins and trying to do right by his children, then thematically, Dabby being the eldest child who potentially was wronged more than any other member of the family, yeah, you see where I'm going with this. It went into what I went. It goes into what I was talking about last episode, where I could totally see Endeavor's character ending at Dabby, with Dabby potentially killing him, or Endeavor sacrificing himself to Dabby to potentially save Shoto or something like that. But yeah, it seems clear that Endeavor's storyline and Dabby are probably going to be pretty closely linked, which makes sense because what better way to represent the idea of Endeavor coming to terms with what he's done and paying for his sins other than to have him literally confront the biggest monster or villain of his creation, being Dabby, right? Someone who he treated so badly that they went completely down the wrong path and became this murderous villain. Speaking of Dabby, he showed up at the beginning just to retrieve the Nomu, apparently, which I suppose makes sense if the idea of this whole operation was to be a strength test for the Nomu. And I thought last episode that maybe Dabby set all of this up because he wanted... his goal was to weaken Endeavor enough with the Nomu to where he could then show up and talk to Endeavor without any risk of being blown to smithereens, right? But it seems that's not the case. It seems this was all just a test for the Nomu's power. The fact that Endeavor was there was never planned. It was all, that was down to Hawks. So I believe Dabby when he says he's just here to retrieve the Nomu. I suppose it's possible that there's information I don't know. Like, aha, Dabby knew it was a setup the whole time or some rubbish like that, right? But at the time being, I'm willing to believe that Dabby just showed up to retrieve the Nomu and that's all there is to it. But he didn't retrieve the Nomu, as far as I saw. I don't think he even could retrieve the Nomu because there was nothing to retrieve, come to think of it. But would Dabby know that? Now that I think about it, yeah, that's a good point. If Dabby didn't see what happened and saw the Nomu was burnt to ashes, you can't retrieve that. So maybe that was a lie. I don't know. Whatever. I'll have to see more context to that. Yeah, you ain't retrieving that Nomu. It was burnt to ashes, and even if you could, he didn't because he got carried away by Ujiko. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. When Maruko or Miruko, I'm not good with pronunciation. When the bunny girl hero showed up, Dabby was like, okay, I've got 2 injured pro heroes, 1 full health pro hero. I can't deal with this, right? I'm strong, but I'm not that strong. I'm getting out of here. And he called for Ujiko, and this same kind of weird grey sludge teleportation stuff, the same stuff that happened in season 3, showed up. Now, all the way back in season 1, and this is where I mentioned last episode how I have kind of recapped the show in my memory, but I've forgotten some details, right? Like some details still, some small details might escape my mind because I didn't have time to sit down and rewatch every single episode all the way back, right? But from what I remember, in season 1, when Shimura and all the other villains return to the little bar they're in and they talk to All For One, there is a second voice that All For One is speaking to on the television. And I believe there is a second person with All For One who we see speaking to him on multiple occasions throughout kind of the next few seasons. But as far as I can remember, we never got any conclusion to that character, right? I could be wrong, again, maybe I'm just forgetting some details, but as far as I'm remembering, there were 2 people, All For One, and that person who was with him who was in like the place that he was. And then in season 3, All For One showed up, and this other guy who was with him, we never saw him, I'm pretty sure. I mean, we might have seen him, but we never saw him. We never saw his story conclude. We didn't see him die or get captured or anything like that. He just kind of disappeared. So maybe that's this Ujiko guy? If that guy has teleportation powers, he could have easily teleported All For One over to the area. So, the fact that All For One was there doesn't mean that he was there as well, because it seems to be teleportation. But yeah, with the Warp Gate guy gone, it seems as though the Warp Gate guy and this guy work slightly differently, because they both seem to have some form of teleportation ability, but they definitely look different. One is like a fluid, and the other is, well, an actual portal. They seem to work very differently in terms of how they actually function, which I'd like to learn more about that, because with My Hero Academia, one thing I really like about this show is that they put a lot of effort into the quirks, right? It's not like this guy has super speed, this guy has super strength. It's like, no, the quirks, they work in a specific way. There are weaknesses, strengths, and you can kind of analyze them and look into, okay, this is how they work. You know what I mean? Like Stain is a perfect example. He has to drink the blood of his enemy, and depending on what blood type it is, they freeze for different lengths of time. There's very clear strengths and weaknesses and ways around that quirk. It's a very specific quirk. I like that. And it's possible that they're just teleportation quirks that basically work the same way, but I doubt that, because with Warp Gate, it was a very standard portal, right? You have the portal, you stick your hand through, it comes out the other side of the other portal, right? Pretty straightforward. But with this guy, it's like the person gets surrounded in a fluid and then they like slowly fizzle away. It definitely, it's the same concept of teleportation, but it definitely seems to work slightly differently. And I'm curious to see if this quirk has any quirks to it, you know, where it's not quite a portal, but it works in a different way, and that maybe allows some manipulation of it, which wouldn't be possible with just straight up portal, right? But yeah, it makes sense that they have this guy, because if they do lose Warp Gate, then, you know, it's also clear that the teleportation power isn't a power of one for all. I mean, all for one, sorry. It's very clear that the power isn't a power of all for one, because back during season 3, when All For One wanted to teleport the League of Villains away, if that was his power, he could have just done that. He could have just teleported them away, right? But instead, he used a forceful activation of Warp Gate. I forget his name. Again, I do remember the characters, I'm just bad with names. He used a forceful activation of his quirk, and then used Magni's quirk to force them all into the portal, right? So it's clear he himself doesn't have this goop teleportation power, because if he did, then he would have just used that to get the League of Villains away. He wouldn't have had any need to do this forceful activation of the Warp Gate, right? That would be completely pointless. So the fact he did that means it's not his power, which means it's probably the power of the other guy who was with him, who is probably this Ujiko guy, right? Makes sense. I wonder if this guy is another one of the people who was raised by All For One, the same way that giant guy in the woods was, right? That's possible. And then we get into the stuff with Hawks, right? We get into the stuff with Hawks. And my suspicions was right. I was saying, like, okay, I don't believe the Hawks is a villain. And even when they were having that conversation, I was like, no, like, I'm not buying into it. And yeah, I was right to not buy into it, because Hawks is acting as a double agent, unbeknownst to anyone, but it seems these two agent people of this agency. And this was also an interesting episode for Hawks as well. I feel like I can kind of get an idea of his character, because in the ED of last season, they showed what looked like Hawks with people with suits, kind of like he was being trained in some government facility. So, and his whole philosophy seems to be he wants a world where heroes can kind of relax, right? I'm too fast for my own good, which, considering what we saw this episode of him as a child saving people, right? And then these people came, these like people in suits came like, hey, while looking into your child, we want to help him, blah, 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 right? I'm too fast for my own good. So, too fast for his own good. He developed too quickly. He started acting as a hero too early, and that brought the attention of these government agents. They begin training him. Maybe it's not very nice training. Maybe it's kind of harsh and difficult. His whole childhood, he's in a lab being trained by these people to be a hero. It's this very strict, clinical upbringing. Too fast for his own good, you know. He as a kid, he went into trying to save people too quickly, and that got the attention of these people. And now his childhood's being turned into this prolonged experiment by this agency. And now that he's out of that, now that he has some freedom, he just wants to create a world where people can fucking relax, right? Because he had this childhood where he was being prodded at and picked at by these government agents. His powers tested, all because, you know, he started using his powers too fast. He was too quick for his own good. And now that he's finally out of that life where he's being prodded by these agencies and being tested all the time and being molded into this hero who can save everyone, Now he just wants a world where that doesn't have to happen, where heroes can have time off and relax and just live normal lives. I think that's based off of the information we have so far. I think that's a pretty safe analysis of his character. That seems pretty straightforward. That he's this person who had this very kind of this upbringing with some kind of agency that was, molding him into a hero, and now, as a way to reject that, almost, he wants this kind of laid-back world where heroes don't have to be like that, where they can kind of relax and chill. But yeah, we can see that he was responsible for setting up the whole Nomu situation, right? And Dabi and Hawks both kind of double-crossed each other. Because it seems like the original plan was, okay, I'm going to lure a powerful hero to an unpopulated area. Right? I don't know if it was unpopular, but it's clear that it didn't happen in the area Hawks was expecting it to. I'm going to lure a powerful hero to a kind of a less populated area, and the Nomu is going to show up, and this can be a strength test for the Nomu. But they both kind of double-crossed each other, because Dabi had the Nomu show up in a very populated area that Hawks wasn't expecting, at least as far as I'm aware. I might have misunderstood, but I think that's what happened. But Hawks, in turn, brought Endeavor along, right? Which isn't what Dabi was expecting. Like, we wanted a strong hero, not the number one hero, right? But it's good, because I doubt any other hero would have been able to take out this guy, unless they had a very specific quirk that was very useful against the Nomu. But yeah, it seems like they both don't fully trust each other, Dabi kind of stabbed Hawks in the back a little bit by having the Nomu show up in a different area. Kind of almost like as a test, like, you're really with us? And then, of course, it seems like neither of them fully trust the other, which makes sense, right? If the number two hero suddenly became a villain, honestly, I think you'd have to be kind of gullible to fully fall for that. Like, oh, what, the number two hero in the world just wants to join our villains. Yes, I totally believe you. Like, you'd have to be kind of gullible to believe that. So, either they don't believe it, and they're just going along with it because it's beneficial, or they do believe it because stuff we don't know about Hawks could lead someone to believe that he would be willing to become a villain. Again, going about that backstory that we haven't really seen, but we've seen little glimpses of. That's the two possibilities. Either they do believe him. It's obvious that they don't fully trust him, right? But either they do believe him, they just aren't 100% trusting of him yet. In which case, there's got to be stuff we don't know about him. Because if all there is to Hawks is what we've seen, then you'd have to be pretty gullible to believe that, oh yeah, this number two hero who seems like a really cool guy just wants to become a villain. Sure, I'll believe you, right? You'd have to be pretty gullible to believe that. So either they don't believe it at all, and they're just using him, or they do believe it but are skeptical, but the reason they're willing to kind of believe it a little bit is because maybe there's some stuff in his backstory that we're not aware of which could lead you to believe he's willing to become a villain. Or it could be a thing in the middle where, like, they kind of believe it, but they're very, very, very skeptical and they're kind of using him, but, some point in the middle. But point is, yeah, neither side trusts each other right now, that's clear. And they're kind of jabbing at each other, prodding at each other, seeing what they can get away with, seeing how the other reacts, that sort of thing. And we even got a little moment with Dabi, where when he confronted Hawks and Endeavor, they mentioned the Sand hero that he killed in Season 3. And he was like, you're the guy who killed Sandboy. And I was like, Sandboy? Who's that? I can't even remember his name. But he didn't even remember who he was. He's killed so many people he doesn't even remember, right? But now, it was like nighttime, it was hours and hours and hours later, maybe even days later. We don't know exactly how long this kind of has happened over in terms of time. He finally remembers, like, oh, yeah, I do remember that guy. Do you not care about the lives of the people you leave behind? And we see a little bit of blood trickle from underneath the eye, which is obviously meant to be like a tear, right? And I believe he said, in fact, I've written it down. Where is it? Yes. I've thought so much about it that I've gone crazy. Which, that gives us a little bit of insight into his character. Definitely. I don't really know where to take that, because, we know so little about Dabi's backstory. Chances are, most likely, he was a child of Todoroki. Technically what I said wasn't incorrect. He was a child of Endeavor, probably the oldest child. Shit went really badly. He ran away or something. He ran away or was abandoned or something. And he became a villain. He ended up killing people, being racked with guilt and remorse, feeling like a piece of shit, being completely overwhelmed with guilt and remorse for the people he's killed, thinking so much about the families of the people left behind, and eventually it fucking drove him around the bend, and now he's this kind of deranged person who kills without remorse, but deep, deep, deep down inside, he still feels that little twinge of maybe who he used to be. You know, I'm just speculating here, but yeah, that line was put there intentionally. Like, that wasn't an accident that they had that little line where the tear came out, right? They did that intentionally. And then, speaking of the Todoroki family, Endeavor shows up at the house with the three children, Shoto, the sister, and the white-haired brother, whose names I can't remember, but again, I'm bad with names, I'm sorry. He shows up at the house, and it's a fairly realistic response. The daughter, who seems like out of everyone, she was the least affected in her childhood. I don't know why that is. Maybe she's like a younger sibling of Shoto or something. In fact, I don't know if she was a younger or older sibling. I don't know if that was ever mentioned, but for whatever reason, out of all of them, she seems to be the least kind of traumatized by it. She just wants everyone to be a nice, big, happy family. Todoroki has already gone through that development where he's kind of like, he's trying to kind of forget about the trauma of his past and move on with his life. And the white-haired brother is the one who's the most angry about the situation. And yeah, that's completely understandable. Obviously, you have this guy who treated the whole family like garbage and made your life a living hell for your entire childhood and teen years. Even if he wasn't treating him as badly as he was Shoto, he's still not good, right? Just the simple act of neglect, it might not be as extreme as literally beating them to a bloody pulp, right? It might not be that extreme, but it can still cause some serious psychological issues, right? And to have the dad come back and be like, hey, I'm here to make things right. It's like, hey, fuck off, you know? It's like, I don't care what you're trying to do. I don't care if you want to make things right. That doesn't change anything that happens, you know? And it's understandable, right? And it's a situation where, like, you have situations where someone does something wrong to you, where you feel like they've wronged you, right? And this is a more minor thing. It's not like childhood abuse, but like just someone you trust, someone you love, someone you care about deeply, they betray you in some way. They do something terrible to you, like maybe a partner cheats on you, or a parent does something, you know, or your best friend does something really shitty to you, you know, where it's like, it's not as bad as an entire childhood of abuse, right? But someone you trust and love does something bad to you, and that can affect you in a very deep way, depending on how much you've tied yourself and your own sense of identity and purpose and emotion to them, right? If it's someone a partner, for example, who you have a really close connection with, and then suddenly they do something to just totally betray you, that can make you feel like your fucking heart's been ripped in half and left a hole that can't be filled. Or if a parent does something, it's like, this is the person who I've loved my entire life, and I had so much respect and trust in them, and they've done this. You know, it's like, even just one moment of betrayal or treating you like trash can just completely wreck you emotionally, and it's not something that you just get over. Like, even if that person is willing to try to make things up with you, that doesn't mean that you can actually do that, right? Like, it might take months or years before that sense of trust and that sense of I love you and I'm willing to look past what you did. It could take a long time for that to come back. And that's just for a small thing in comparison, right? Where it's like one moment of them being a complete dickhead to you and hurting you in some way. So, an entire childhood of neglect and abuse, yeah, it's going to take more than one conversation to get over that. And they kind of brought that up in season 2, right? Where Deku kind of had that talk with Todoroki, like, it's your power, right? And Todoroki had that moment in episode 10. But it's like, okay, that was a good moment. It was great. But it's not as though Todoroki is fixed, right? You don't get over a childhood of abuse in one conversation. That doesn't happen, right? It doesn't work that way. So, you know, just one moment where someone you love and trust betrays you can screw you up for a long time. And even if they come back and want to make things right, it can take a long time for those wounds to heal. So an entire childhood of neglect and abuse, yeah, I don't blame the brother at all for acting the way he's acting. Why should he forgive Endeavor? Right now, Endeavor has done nothing to earn forgiveness. all he's done is show up and be like, "Hey, I'm here now. I want to be a dad." It's like, okay, you don't get a medal for doing what you should have been doing the past fucking 20 years, you know what I mean? I like Endeavor as a character. I like the direction they're taking with it. I'm very interested to see where his character goes. But yeah, the reaction of the brother is completely understandable, right? It's going to take a long time before he's even willing to accept that, even willing to give Endeavor a chance, really. The daughter is a bit naive in this situation, thinking, oh, he's just going to come back and everything's going to be all right, but it's understandable for her to feel that way, right? If what she just wants is, if she isn't as affected emotionally by what Endeavor did, like the brothers were, if she isn't affected quite as much by that, and she just wants everyone to come together and be a happy family, then it's understandable that she would feel this way. It's like, oh, I was hoping that once he's back, everyone could talk and make up and it would be fine. But yeah, it is naive on her part, but it's understandable that she just want a family and she just wants everything to work out. Yeah, I'm very interested with this Endeavor kind of focus we're getting, both him as a hero and his role as the new symbol for this world, this very volatile and unstable world that was already unstable when All Might was around, never mind now that he's the number one hero, right? And then on top of that, there's this whole situation with his family, and now a link to the potential villains of the villains in Dabby, who is most likely his son, the eldest brother. Unless the eldest brother has shown up, I'm just forgetting about it, which is possible, but as far as I can remember, I haven't seen him outside of maybe a flashback. So yeah, it seems like Endeavor's going to be getting a lot of focus because he's tied to the society as a whole, which has been a focus. He's tied to the main characters with Todoroki, and the family. He's tied to the villains with Dabby. It definitely seems like he is going to be the center of attention, maybe for like this season or maybe the entire show, right? It definitely seems like he's going to play a key role here, which I'm very excited to see because I find the direction they're taking the character to be very interesting. Let's see what happens. I'm glad that they're taking their time with it. I'm glad they're doing that. I'm glad that they're not like, Endeavor came back, his family, I'm willing to give you a second. Like, I'm glad that's not happening because that would be silly. You know, I'm glad they're having this, but I'm glad that they're treating it in a way where it's like, okay, they're not willing to just forgive him because he came back, because that would be stupid, right? Even if you are willing to come back and make things right, that doesn't mean you can't just have what you want immediately. You need to work for it. You need to prove that you are worth being in their lives, and you are worth them putting their trust and love into you. And on top of that, you need to make up for the fucking years and years and years and years of abuse you did. So it ain't gonna happen overnight, right? So yeah, we talked about the Endeavor and Hawk stuff. We talked about the Dabby stuff. We talked about all that stuff. The only thing left to talk about is the Deku stuff. We got to look into Deku and the One for All power. It's so difficult. I can never get the two right. I mean, I did get the two right, but I always have to take a second to think about the One for All power. This was some straight up like time travel stuff, right? Like this, like not actually time travel, but he was looking back into events that did happen, or perhaps more specifically, it seemed like the first user of the power was sending memories forward, which, I mean, I'm an Attack on Titan channel. I'm kind of familiar with this concept of paths linking people through time. I'm kind of familiar with this whole idea. This is very Attack on Titan-y, right? It definitely has that kind of feel to it. I wonder how that works though, because his power doesn't have any. His power. Okay, this whole situation has me confused but interested. So Deku is having a dream. It's clear that there is some link between Deku and previous users of the One for All power. We know that because in Season 2, that link was utilized to get Deku out of a very bad spot when he was facing Shinzo and he had the mind, when that happened. Very briefly, he connected with the previous users of the power, and through that, boom, just for an instant, he was able to kind of get his focus and escape from the mind control, right? Through that link. So the fact that there is some kind of link between him and the past users of the power. Wow, this is sounding so Attack on Titan now, it's crazy. because there's a clear link between him and the past users, and that's been established in season 2. I suppose, yeah, okay, I'm willing to believe this. Seeing back into the past, that's the interesting thing. The first holder, he said that he wanted to show you more, right? So this isn't a thing of Deku looking back into the past. This is a thing of someone from the past sending these memories forward, right? This isn't some, oh, I accidentally looked into the past. I know this was an intentional thing where memories were sent from the past into the future, which creates a whole bunch of interesting implications. That creates a whole bunch of interesting implications. Now, Attack on Titan goes really deep into paths and how this shit works and how time is all linked. People throughout all different periods of time are linked together, and it really goes in depth in how the fuck that can fucking influence people, right? I'm not going to spoil shit because although I'm an Attack on Titan channel, it's possible that people who are just My Hero Academia fans who haven't seen Attack on Titan are coming to watch this video, so I won't go into spoilers. But yeah, Attack on Titan goes in depth in that concept. I don't know how in depth My Hero Academia is going to go with it, but I'm still going to talk about it because it's interesting to talk about. And I want to talk about it. So, okay. So, if Deku isn't looking into the past. That's not the idea here. Deku isn't looking into the past. It's been made very clear. This is something that was shown to him by the first holder of the power. So this isn't him accessing past, right? No, this is someone from the past sending memories to the future, which has very interesting implications, because that means that there is a link from the past to the future. Does that make sense? Like, okay, so the future doesn't exist. There is no future, right? The past is the past, the present is now, the future doesn't exist yet, right? I chose to raise my right arm right now. I didn't have to do that. I chose to do that. That was my future, right? Future non-existence, there is no future. There is only the present, and the future is just our idea of what the present will become once we reach it. There is no actual future. It doesn't exist, right? That's kind of one idea. The other idea is the idea of like fate. Like there is a predetermined kind of future. And this has actually been kind of toyed with, this idea, by Night Eye in season 4, right? Because he could look into someone's future, right? He looked many years into All Might's future and saw that he was going to die. So this idea of a predetermined future has been toyed around with in My Hero Academia before, in season 4, by Night Eye. This idea that there is kind of a fate of what's going to happen. There is kind of a predetermined future, which is interesting because that means that in a way, if the first user of the power was able to contact Deku from the past, that means that Deku getting the power was always kind of predetermined from the beginning, right? Because he was able to contact Deku, and we already have this idea of like fate and a predetermined future from Night Eye in season 4. So this idea of a predetermined future isn't completely unheard of in this show, right? The idea of fate and future. But what's also important to note is that the future isn't 100% set in stone, because that was all he was able to escape his own future, his own predetermined death. But that makes things more interesting. Oh man, this is messing with my head now. That makes things more interesting because Night Eye saw in Deku's future that he was going to die. The original holder of All for One, One for All, the original holder of One for All, showed these memories to future Deku, right? Now, oh my god, there's so many things I want to talk about. There's so many things I want to talk about here. Okay. So let's say that time is a moving entity, right? So time in the past is moving, time in the future is moving, they exist as parallels to each other. In fact, no, let's not get into that yet. Let's stick to what I'm talking about. So, man, this is interesting. This is very interesting. So, Night Eye saw into Deku's future, and he saw that he was going to die. Deku was able to avoid that future because he had Eri with him. And Eri has weird time manipulation powers, right? She has this weird quirk. And because of that, he was able to avoid the predetermined future of dying. He bended the future, right? He bent the future, changed the future to survive when it was predetermined that he was going to die. Now that's really interesting because now we have the idea of a predetermined future with the first holder of the power, one for all. Yes, I got it right that time. The first user of one for all sent a memory into the future. Oh, this is where it gets interesting because, okay, he could send this memory to any point in the future, right? He sent this memory to a point in the future after Deku's predetermined death, right? Deku was predetermined by Night Eye to die in Season 4, right? That was his predetermined destination. That was his predetermined fate. But he didn't die. He was able to change the future through Eri. And yet, despite that, the first holder of the power, who existed decades ago, long before this predetermined death was altered, sent a message to a point in time to Deku after that predetermined death, which creates some interesting ideas. And he also said, I wanted to show you more, but you only have 20% of the power right now. So, is this actually a message from the past, or is it that all the users of the power still exist within Deku? That's also a possibility. It might not actually be a time travel thing. It might be that all the users of the power still exist within Deku, within the power. They are within him. That would make sense because the final line was, I think, "You are not alone," or something along those lines. That was the final line. So it might not be a time travel thing at all. Actually, another possibility is that an idea that Night Eye himself actually brought up, which is what if the future is only fixed because I looked into it, right? Like, that's the one Faye had with All Might, is that, like, maybe the future isn't fixed, maybe the future isn't set in stone, but by looking into the future, I fixed it in place. Like, I created that future by seeing it. So maybe in this universe, the future isn't set in stone, right? And Deku could have gone down any number of routes, but then when Night Eye looked into his future, that is the future he saw in that moment, because that's just the future he was brought to, but then it changed. Like, that wasn't the fate that was destined from Deku since the beginning, it was the fate that was destined from Deku kind of from the beginning of that situation because of how things played out. But then that raises the question of how did the first user of the power then send the message to Deku if it wasn't predetermined that he would reach that point? My head's spinning. Okay, point is, when you bring in time travel stuff, it gets complicated. So, for the time being, I'm going to assume it's not actually time travel, meaning I'm going to assume that the first user of the power in the past wasn't sending memories forward to Deku. I'm going to assume that's not the case. Because if I assume that is the case, that brings up a whole bunch of questions that I could spend hours just talking about. And I don't want to do that because that would take up so much time. So for the sake of keeping things simple, I'm going to assume that all previous users of the power exist in some capacity still. They still exist within the power, they still exist within Deku, and this isn't a message from the past. This is the first user right now in the present, in whatever form he continues to exist in, bringing the memories, his own memories, and showing them to Deku. So it's not a time travel thing. He's looking into the past through memories of someone who still exists in some capacity. I'm going to assume that, because if I don't assume that, things become really complicated. So yeah, that's what I'm going to assume, which also makes sense because he says, we are still with you. And this brings into something I've kind of wanted to be taught. I've wanted to talk about regarding the One for All power, but I never really got the chance to talk about. Something I wanted to discuss, but now that the power is being directly brought up, I kind of want to talk about it. And that is, what is the power? Because here's the thing. I'll talk about this from the beginning, because this is something I wanted to talk about, but this is a good opportunity to talk about it. What is the power? In the most literal sense, what is the power? Well, we know what the power is. It is the ability to pass on quirks combined with the ability to stockpile power. Those are the two abilities. The ability to stockpile power combined with the ability to pass on quirks combined, right? So he stockpiled his own power, passed it on to the next holder. Then that person added their own power to it and passed it on to the next person. That person added their own power. Right. We know there's been 9 generations, including Deku, I believe, of this power. We know that Deku and All Might were both quirkless. I think it's reasonable to assume that they weren't all quirkless, right? Because if there's only 9 generations, how would you have stockpiled that much power? That doesn't make any sense, right? Because if it doesn't add power out of nowhere, it adds your power. It adds your power to One for All and then passes it on. If it was 9 generations of people who were completely quirkless before they received the power, then it wouldn't make sense for All Might to be so powerful, right? Like, if he was just like a moderately strong hero, okay, fair enough, I can buy into it. Like a Kirishima or a Sugarman kind of thing, where it's like, they're strong but not unreasonably, ridiculously so. But like, no, All Might is insanely powerful. Number 1 hero by a large margin. You don't get that amount of power from stockpiling the abilities of 9 quirkless people. That doesn't make any sense. If it was 2,000 quirkless people, then okay, that's believable. But 9? No, that doesn't make any sense. There's no way that all 9 of them were quirkless, because there's no way you'd be able to reach the level of power that All Might was at if you were quirkless. It doesn't make any sense. They had to have had quirks and power where they were already powerful in their own right, and then passed it on, right? That also makes sense because it's not as though being quirkless is necessary for the power, because All Might was going to UA originally. That was his original plan. He was going to go to UA to meet a successor, right? So it's not as though he intended to pass it on to someone who's quirkless. That was just a happy little coincidence, right? Oh, you're quirkless too. Well, what do you know? That wasn't his intent from the start. It's just how things played out. So I think it's safe to assume that the previous holders of the power were not quirkless, right? So they have quirks of their own, and they also inherited the ability to stockpile power and pass on their quirks, right? That's what the power is. It's the ability to pass on quirks. Why would they not pass on their own quirk? So, let's say, for the sake of argument, the third holder of the power had fire abilities, right? He had fire manipulation. And it was his time to pass on All for One, One for All. There's no reason for him to not pass his firepower along with it. There's no reason not to do that. Why wouldn't you, right? Why not? Why wouldn't you do that, right? So it makes sense, logically speaking, that as the generations went on, the quirks were passed down, right? I mean, why wouldn't you do that? There'd be no reason not to do that. I would say, oh, maybe it's because you can't have too many quirks or powers in one person. But, I mean, isn't that the whole point of the One for All power? Is it's stockpiling power? It's bringing the power of multiple people into one person? So, no, that's the whole point of the power. So surely you would be able to hold multiple powers. That's literally the point of the power, right? So, if we go under the assumption that past users of the power had quirks, which they have to have had, because there's no way you could get this level of power from 9 quirkless people. That would be ridiculous. So they must have had quirks in the past. That's just a reasonable assumption. They all had the quirk to pass on their quirks. There would be no reason to not pass on their own actual original quirk as well, right? There'd be no reason not to do that. Unless there's some reason that hasn't been established yet, like, oh, you can only pass on one quirk, you can't pass on blah, blah, blah. But that wouldn't make any sense either, because the original user passed on 2 quirks. He passed on the ability to pass on quirks, but he also passed on the ability to stockpile power. So no, that can't be it. They must be able to pass on multiple quirks, because that's what happened to begin with. So no, there is no reason for them to have not passed their own quirks down the generations. Which means that by the time you get to All Might and Deku, they must have the quirks of all previous users, right? I'm thinking about it, that's the only possibility, right? Like, it doesn't make sense for it to be any other way. They can't have been quirkless, I've already explained why. At the moment, there's no explanation as to why they wouldn't be able to pass their original quirk along with the ones they inherited down to the next generation. There's no explanation as to why that couldn't be possible, and in fact, the explanation we have so far would imply that it is possible. So as of right now, yeah, it seems like Deku and All Might must have the combined quirks of all previous users, which brings me to two conclusions. Conclusion number 1 is that we have seen that, and conclusion number 2 is that we haven't. Now, here's the thing. We kind of have seen All for One, One for All, One for All as being kind of one power, right? With All Might, he's super strong, super fast, he's tough as nails, he's like Superman, right? But maybe that's not actually one power. Maybe that's not one power, maybe that's a whole bunch of powers. Maybe he has super strength, and then also super speed, and then also super toughness. Maybe he has a bunch of kind of mundane powers that combined into what we see, right? Maybe if he just had super strength, he would be this big, strong guy, but he would be kind of slow, right? And he wouldn't be able to take too much damage. But it's like, user 2 of the power had super strength, and then user 3 had super speed, and user 4 had super durability, and user 5 had this ability and that ability, you know? And they've combined into what we see with All Might, which is this super fast, super strong, super tough, just all around incredibly powerful guy. That's option 1. Going under the assumption that what we've seen so far is the combined power of everyone, and that All Might was using everything he had. Option 2, which I find far more interesting, is that we haven't seen it all yet. But then that raises the question of why. If every previous user of the power has had their own quirk, before they even got the power to begin with, they had their own quirk and then they passed it down, why haven't we seen that? Again, we can go into the assumption that we have seen, and that's what All Might is. What we've seen from All Might, all of his abilities, is the culmination of all those quirks. But if we go into the assumption that that's not the case and we haven't seen those powers yet, why not? Right? If one person had fire powers and another person had super speed, another person had electricity, maybe that's why Deku has green electricity. I'm getting off track. If we go into the assumption that we haven't seen the powers yet, then why? We did know. Okay, I have a few ideas. Idea number 1: because of All Might's injury, he can't use them. I don't believe that's the case. That seemed like the least likely, but it is still a possibility. Possibility 2: it's stated that he picked up the power right away, like he was a natural, so maybe he was so naturally gifted with the power that he never felt the need to really explore it and dig deep and like draw out those deeper quirks, because he just didn't need to, because he was already perfectly fine how he was. Or option 3, which I feel like is probably the most likely, because whenever we saw All Might training, we saw it with Gran Torino. All Might, the person who passed the power down to All Might, he was clearly close with her, but she wasn't around forever, right? She wasn't around all the time that All Might was, because All Might was trained a lot by Gran Torino. And we know that the previous holder was killed by One for All. All for One! The one time I'm actually supposed to say One for All for One. We know the previous holder was killed by All for One. So I suppose it's possible that maybe she was killed before she had the ability to train that to All Might. But yeah, point is, the logical outcome to this thinking about the power, the logical conclusion to come to, is that most likely, all previous users of the power have passed their quirks down to the next generation, in which case, either what we've seen from All Might, all of his powers, those are the culmination of every previous quirk, like super strength, super speed, all that kind of stuff. That is, like, we've seen that in All Might, that is what that is. Or option 2, we haven't seen that, and All Might hasn't been using the full scope of the power, in which case that opens up some room for Deku, potentially, to get some new abilities, right? I could see that being the case. He could go back. I could see that being the case where he goes back, he discovers this now that he seems to have some kind of link to the previous users, he goes back and begins unlocking these other powers, and he explores areas of the power that even All Might himself didn't. Now that's interesting. That's very interesting indeed. I want to see that. Okay, I could go on about this for hours. I could go on about this for absolute hours if I wanted to, but I'm going to cut it here because I don't want to be talking about one subject for too long, especially when it's all just speculation. But continuing on, the final subject of discussion, the actual flashback itself. We learnt a lot about One for All. We learnt a lot about All for One in this flashback, and the first holder. Basically what we learnt is that All for One is a manipulative bastard, is what we learnt. He viewed the world as chaotic, right? It's a very kind of, it's very Sauron from Lord of the Rings, right? Where Sauron's whole motivation basically was, this world is chaotic and harsh, and the people living in it don't know what to do with it, and they're destroying the world. I'm going to control everything. I'm going to create these rings, give them to all the world leaders. I'm going to bring the world under my rule to bring order to the world. That was his whole motivation, right? All for One is very similar to that. He seems to have a very similar motivation, where it's like the world is chaotic with quirks. There are people with no quirks who have no choice and no say in how the world, they're being left behind. You have people who have quirks who don't want what they have, whose lives have been made into living hell. Everything is chaos. I'm going to bring order and control through my power, right? Is it possible that's genuinely his intention? Sure. It's also possible that he just wants power and he just wants control, and he's putting on airs about, oh, I just want to help the world, you know. I don't know about that, mister. I think you just are very power hungry, but we'll see, I guess. But yeah, we could see he brought people to his side by giving them hope, I guess. People who had quirks, who didn't want them, he took the quirks away and gave them a chance at the normal life they wanted. And people who didn't have quirks, who felt like they had no say or power in this new world, he gave them quirks. He brought people to his side not through force, but through manipulation, which is what we saw with Shimura as well. Mr. Hands. I forget his full name. I hope that's his name, unless I'm getting it wrong. Oh wait, no, is Nana Shimura, is that the name of the previous holder? I forget, I'm bad with names. Mr. Hands, the guy with the hand on his face. We saw through him, All For One showed up and was like, you've been abandoned, haven't you? Here, I'm here for you. You know, it was very manipulative. And that seems like his stick, right? He's not like, I'm going to make you join me by force. He's a manipulator. He, again, very much like Sauron, actually. I'm seeing a lot of Sauron influence here. Even though his design was based off of Darth Vader, his personality seems very Sauron-y, where he's like, he's not taking over by force. He's kind of manipulating people, bringing people to his side, promising them things, and then kind of tainting them, corrupting them over to his side, you know? And then eventually, he created this situation where he's not even having to give orders, right? There's people who oppose him, people in groups who don't want what he wants. They don't want him in control. And he doesn't even need to give people orders. His followers just go out and destroy those people because they're so loyal to him and his worldview. He doesn't even need to give orders. He's creating this situation where he's not forcing people to work for him. He's molding people and manipulating people to his side, to where they love him and cherish him and view him as the good guy, pretty much. They view him as the good guy, in a way. And they, and it's to the point where he doesn't even need to give orders to people because they are just so on his side and they agree with him. And eventually it'll reach a point, obviously if his plans work out, which I hope they don't, it'll reach a point in which he's not even necessarily the ruler of the world. He's just brought the world to a place where everyone agrees with him, where everyone is on his side. He doesn't need to be in control and pulling the strings because everyone is doing his bidding without even needing orders because they just are that on his side. They agree with him so much. Okay, I ended up having to the last like 3 minutes of my video got a bit corrupted, so I ended up having to re-record it here. But yeah, I finished talking about All For One and all that stuff, and I just went on to say that that final line of I wanted to show you more, but you're only at 20% now, I think is what he said. That's really interesting because that implies that as he gets more power, he's going to get more information, which, you know, I wonder why that's the case. Maybe maybe the more the power he can bring out, the stronger that link between them is. That's possible, I suppose. But yeah, point is, it's a very natural kind of way to, like, okay, as Deku becomes stronger and the story progresses, we can get more information, and it's kind of a very natural way to progress things. But yeah, I could continue talking about this for ages, but I'm not gonna, because this video needs to end eventually. I can't go on talking for hours. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed. I hope every single one of you is happy. I hope there's someone out there is doing okay. And yeah, I'll see you all again soon. Bye-bye.